Chris, it's lovely to have you on the YouTube video, and it's so nice to see this garden in the flesh, because I've seen versions of this from your books, from slides, and it's amazing the way you've turned your whole front garden pretty much over to water and wildlife. So different from the usual thing. And what particularly brought it home for me is that my dad, who was a sportsman, a tennis player, squash player and everything right up to his 90s, I gave him a copy of your book. He'd never done much gardening, and he did the exact same. He turned his front garden into a lovely wildlife garden with a huge pool and things like that, and it gave him endless pleasure. And just hearing the birds, it is obviously a wonderful solution. So when did this lightning moment happen to you? When did you think, right, front garden, water, wildlife?
Well, there's a negative side to it. I spent quite a lot of my youth mowing lawns in the parks, and I thought, never again, I'm not going to mow lawns. But
so you have actually mown a lawn?
Oh, I have mown a lawn. I've even written off a mowing machine for Sheffield Parks Department at the age of about 18 by nobody telling me how to stop it.
Oh, boy racer with a mower.
Straight into the river.
On purpose.
Hopefully they've forgotten. But the other thing is that it's a small garden. We're in the middle of Wolverhampton, so it's very urban. But it's very leafy because the Victorians planted lots of street trees and things. But most importantly for me, I wanted a space outside the window that changed with the seasons. You know, and I was training as a horticulturist and then landscape architect at the time when evergreen ground cover was the thing.
Begonia, acres of begonia and cotoneaster.
And I've worked quite a lot in retirement housing over the years, one way or the other, and you suddenly realise you're in landscapes where you couldn't tell whether it was January or July. And then I worked in inner city housing, really grim inner city housing in Toxteth and Brixton and Hackney in the 80s. Everywhere I worked there were riots at one point. And the same thing, you could not tell what time of year it was. And I wanted my gardens, to tell me it was January, or to tell me it was February, even the subtle changes. And that's what this garden does, and that's what the pond does. That gives you immediate feedback every single day. You open the blinds and it's raining or it's frosted over. So this is really a garden for me which is all about the English countryside in the middle of the city, but particularly heightening that sense of changing seasons, and that's why I'm thrilled when the wood anemones are just coming through now, the primroses are everywhere, but the bluebells have not yet flowered, and that kind of subtle changing, I just love, and it's what we've lost so much of in the wider landscape.
And it is much lower maintenance. I love the way water bounces light in. Don't you think it really picks up on the sky and it adds so much? And would you agree that is the number one thing for wildlife? If you could just do one thing for wildlife in your garden, would it be that?
Yeah, it would. Pool? It would actually. I think that and just trying to make the think about where you are. I mean, there's relatively little you can achieve independently within a garden this size, but once you start to see your garden as a kind of service station for the wider landscape.
I love that analogy. You've always used that analogy, and it is so good, isn't it? Like little filling stations.
Yeah.
To connect up the areas of green.
Well, and the other thing that's very striking in this neighbourhood is that there are 30 houses in this road, I guess. All the gardens are different. There are about 5, I would think, that have ponds in them.
And was that post, Chris?
Yeah, one of them, interestingly, when we moved in, Ruth, 4 or 5 doors away, said, "You're Chris Baines, I've got your book." And she'd already got the pond. And if you look at her front garden at the moment, she has a very small lawn, which at the moment is completely full of fritillarias, of snakehead fritillaries. I mean, they've been... I've envied that little patch of fritillaries for 30 odd years now. Absolutely brilliant. But the point is that immediately next door it's all lawn, and there are every kind of garden you could imagine, really. And so although I don't have a lawn here, the song thrushes collect their mud here for their nest lining, but they find the worms next door.
Yeah.
So it's the mosaic of different habitats that you get. And if you think about what we've lost from the wider countryside, that kind of medieval structure of hedgerows and small fields that went long ago, you then look at this kind of neighbourhood. My garden's just a glade in the urban forest, really. And there are all these different elements, which is why the bird life is so extraordinary. I mean, the songbirds here are woodland birds because this is a woodland as far as they're concerned.
Yeah.
It has the added benefit of ponds and bird feeders and nest boxes and all the other things you can do to enhance it. But essentially it's a landscape that's very much alive 12 months of the year.
And your hedge, I noticed you've got a coniferous hedge there, and I was surprised to hear you waxing about its virtues. I think we all tend to think conifer hedges, and let's say they just get bigger and they're over dominant, but yours does have plus points.
Well,
I forget, we all forget that there are good things.
Well,
about
I'm essentially an optimist. So you move into a house that has a hedge.
Yeah.
What can you make of it? So whether I think I would have planted perhaps beech or hornbeam or something, just because it would give me a bit more seasonal variation in the year. But since we had a leyland hedge, we still have a leyland hedge. I'm growing holly through it. I'm growing ivy through it, so that the textures and the reflectiveness change. But it's brilliant. There's always a pair of blackbirds that nest in there. There's always a hedge sparrow nest in there, and it works as a part of the whole.
Yeah.
And most importantly, it provides shelter and enclosure.
So it does have its benefits, and I love your Daphne mesoreum there. Now, I was aware that was native, and I think I have seen one in our woods, but I've never grown it. But that is a total beauty, isn't it? It's really nice
stunning.
Native plant.
It has a wonderful perfume, and one of the things that I think you really need to concentrate on in a small garden like this is perfumes. So right by the front door there's a winter honeysuckle that's been glorious for the last 6 or 8 weeks,
Yes.
and Daphne mesoreum has a glorious perfume as well. But the fact that it's native astonishes people, because they think native plants, that's weeds, isn't it? Well, the primroses in my garden are stunning at the moment, and they're native, and Ruth's fritillaries down the road are native. I have a glorious honeysuckle which will flower right through the summer, that's crawling through the hedge on the other side of the garden. Perfume is wonderful. The moths love it. The bats come in to feed on the moths. And it's just a reminder, really, that actually in the mix there is scope for some of those native plants that perhaps get overlooked because they're weeds, aren't they? That's the kind of the bad press they get.
So in your garden, this bit of the garden, excluding the back garden where you've got your vegetables and things, how many hours a week or a year would you say roughly?
A year, I think,
people
would
always
be.
say, I want something low maintenance that flowers all the year round. Now, I think you probably do tick the flowers all around. If you look at the whole, and it is low maintenance, wouldn't you say this? You're not mowing the lawn.
Yeah, I have to spend a few hours through the year on the pond, because
so you'll just thin out the marginal
stuff, pull out the green slime if we have a hot sunny period.
Yeah.
The duckweed is an endless battle, but it's not difficult. A rake through there every few weeks through the summer.
Yeah. So the water is probably the highest maintenance bit of it all.
It probably is, yes.
Yeah, and people always think water is extraordinarily high maintenance, but I totally disagree. In total, you wouldn't be more than, 6 hours a year?
Yeah.
Max, would you say?
Yeah. I mean, you have to get the planting right so that it oxygenates itself. You have to get the snails in there. You have to have the thing self-cleansing.
Yes. Well, you say that as if you have to do this and have to do that, but as long as you make it the right depth, you put in your subsoil on the bottom so all the plants can coalesce and get a good amount of them.
It's interesting, though, the subsoil on the bottom of the pond is something which I didn't really think about at the time, but I keep getting that fed back to me. There's some wildlife gardening contractors that I hear from quite often, and they say, we use the instructions in your book slavishly, and the thing that always surprises the clients is that we're putting subsoil in over the top of the liner.
Because when you fill it up, it goes whoosh, it's like a mud bath.
Yeah, but we have great dragonflies here. They spend 2 out of their 3 years of life down in the pond in the mud.
Yeah.
And if you have a pristine, clean patch of water, none of those things can survive. And it doesn't add greatly to the maintenance issues.
It doesn't add at all, does it?
No.
I mean, people always think, how often do you clear out your pond? Is the other thing you hear again and
Yeah.
again. But you would never
No.
clear it out.
No.
And you don't get a massive sludge build-up. It's not...
No, and
so
that-
if you
I mean,
ever
this
done
pond's
that...
been in there for 30 odd years now.
Yeah.
After about 20 years, it developed a leak in the liner. So actually, this was high maintenance, taking the whole thing out, draining it, getting the time of year to do that right so that you weren't wiping out everything that was living in there, and then putting a new liner in and then starting again. So this pond, this liner is about 15 years old, I suppose now.
Right, okay. So getting back to that then, so what caused the leak? Because this will put the fear of God into everyone listening.
I don't know.
Was it a fox or something?
No, it wasn't anything like that. I think it was just that after 15 or 20 years, the butyl rubber perished somewhere around the margin. It didn't drain completely, but it just kept dropping around the edge.
Yeah.
And with this pond, you would never know it was artificially lined. It's completely natural. The vegetation runs down to the side.
And that is partly because of the soil, isn't it? And you've got that
you just
in
run
there.
it down and up the other side.
Yeah, exactly.
But thinking about the maintenance and just looking at this bit of the garden,
Yeah.
this is all overshadowed by
It's beautiful.
two ornamentals. They're not
Osmanthus,
natives. But if you look at it, it's a complete carpet of woodruff.
Yeah.
Now
Sweet woodruff.
is a beautiful plant. It makes great gin, actually, if you're interested in botanicals in gin.
What, with the
Woodruff.
leaf?
Yeah.
Oh, right.
It gives it a real woodland flavour with very little immersion. But it's got wood anemones coming through now. It's got primroses. But I mean, I go in there maybe once a year for half an hour, because we have sycamore seedlings that blow in, or the seeds blow in. So I can see one now. They have to be pulled out. But actually, if I don't go in there, they would fade away. They wouldn't, generally speaking, ever get beyond that stage because the shade shades them out. But I mean, really very little to do with that part of the garden, except enjoy it.
Yeah.
And
the hellebores give it winter interest.
yeah,
They're beautiful.
And
They
then the
just seed
bluebells you
around.
can see are coming through. And the snowflake. I love the leucojum. It's just a beautiful thing.
Looks stunning, doesn't it? No, it really does. So this really is a highly usable garden. I love the way you've got your chairs up there in the front garden. It's really nice.
Well,
to
and
sit
the
out
dry
in the
stone
sun.
wall is quite important as well, because
Did you make that?
Yeah.
Oh, Chris. Yes.
made that actually entirely from stones that were kicking around in the garden.
Yeah.
And recruited a long-suffering friend to spend a weekend with me. And we built that in order to be able to have a level terrace outside the French windows there.
Yeah.
But that's full of crevices and nooks and crannies. So the pond is, this time of year, alive with newts. You watch it for 2 minutes, particularly when the sun's out. Yeah. And they're constantly coming up to the surface. But in the winter, they leave the pond, and many of them go and spend the winter in the crevices in the dry stone wall. So that kind of relationship between the different bits of the garden is something that you just learn by observation.
So you built it for constructional purposes to make the flat platform, but then you discovered you must have realised that spiders and bugs
it wouldn't
and
have
things will live in
that. It could be a solid concrete block, mortared wall that would hold the terrace up, but it wouldn't provide any of that other dimension to the garden that the gaps in the dry stone wall do.
Yeah. So we've got 6 hours a year for the pond. So what is the total maintenance?
Well, not enough probably is what I would say.
Don't we all say that?
Yeah.
What would you do that you haven't done? Come on, it's beautiful.
I just need, it's more about timing with me.
Yeah.
It's just, if I don't, actually there are no wallflowers this year, just because I was working away just at that critical moment when I might have gone and bought some wallflower plants. So it's much more about timing than anything else. If I have the time, I've just planted a lot of alliums, which are all carefully protected from the grey squirrels by wire netting. So in amongst the planting, you see little squares of wire netting.
I saw that.
And in theory, anyway, lots of alliums will come up in the next few weeks.
I didn't think they ate alliums, but they do they?
They'll eat, well, ours will eat anything given half a chance.
Daffodils, even daffodils will eat.
Yeah.
Oh, right. Now I've done, which I think you'll tell me off for, on top of mine I just got a huge drum of cayenne pepper.
No, I do the same.
But I thought we weren't meant to. I thought that was bad because when they wipe their eyes, the squirrels, or something, it can it can cause
we can
problems
afford
to
a
their
few
eyes.
pains in the eye squirrels in Wolverhampton. If you walk into the local park,
Yes.
you're greeted by this herd of grey squirrels that walks towards you. And very interestingly, we were doing park run in Crewe a couple of weekends ago.
Park run, so you
I'm a
run round the park.
Yeah, I Nordic walk round.
Oh, Nordic walk,
But
right.
Neris is a passionate runner, and
Yes.
so I've run in 110 different park runs around the world, from
Gosh.
New Zealand to Singapore to California. But anyway, we have a park here which is classic Victorian park, and the one in Crewe is the same. This one has herds of grey squirrels. In the one in Crewe, I only saw one grey squirrel, and there were bird feeders in all the bushes there. They must have a programme there of birth control or some other way of controlling the squirrels.
Yeah.
Whereas my way of controlling them is to actually cover the things they're most likely to eat with wire netting and hope for the best.
I mean, there's things, some people love the grey squirrel and other people call them tree rats, but they do a phenomenal amount of damage to trees.
Yes, they
the
do.
cost to councils and things is like millions and millions a year. And they've just got out of control.
If you drive along the
basically,
motorway,
like we have
in the summer,
yes,
you can see the dead branches. Quite often, every kind of a quarter of the tree cover is dead or dying or yellow, and that's the grey squirrels.
Yeah, it's a shame, isn't it? Because it's the same with all the environment. I mean, when people talk about rewilding the garden, if you went off and left this and didn't manage it would be sycamore and brambles, wouldn't it? So it does need managing.
Yeah, and there's a huge difference between gardens and the wider landscape. I mean, you can get away with, you've probably seen there are some pink primroses in this garden.
I did notice one or two.
I didn't plant them, but anyway, there they are.
Yeah.
I mean, that would be catastrophic in an ancient woodland somewhere to start having those kind of garden things. And the rewilding is just doing a phenomenally successful job in the right places. I mean, it really is extraordinary what's happening with the recovery of. I mean, NEP is as you know, is one of the kind of pioneers. The fact that they now have purple emperor butterflies, kind of in droves. I've never seen one in my life. Always understood that the purple emperor is a butterfly that lives in the top of oak trees, which is why you never see it. What they've demonstrated is that actually they're only living in the top of oak trees because that's all that's left of their real habitat. Their real habitat is the scrub woodland. Because they now have quite a lot of scrub woodland, the purple emperors are thriving in that landscape. They didn't plant the scrub woodland, they just let it happen. And now they're looking at the role that kind of woodland cover is playing in soil carbon and rebuilding soils. And it's just so interesting that immediately establishes a kind of polarised view of the world. Goodness knows there's some scope out in the farming countryside for a bit more wildness, given what we've lost in my lifetime. And one of the things, I was talking to a conservation farmer the other day, and he was saying when we go onto a farm that's been modernised, if you like, over the last 60 or 70 years, if we go and dig at the bottom of, if they've got hedges left, go and dig at the bottom of the hedge, and that gives you an indication of what the soil could be like across the farm if they were farming in a different kind of way, because that's the one bit of this natural landscape that's survived. So interesting, actually, that you just think the soil structure is gone, the natural fertility is gone, the natural predator and pesticide system has been wiped out. What was that about? And I trained as a horticulturist at exactly that moment in the 60s when it was all, the revolution was starting. And I remember my first lecture on chemistry, the professor of chemistry proudly introduced himself as having been one of the team that invented DDT. And we all sat, looked in awe at this great scientist. Now I look back and I think, well, was that a great contribution to the world? I'm not so sure.
But all those fertilisers that they're chucking on all the time, but the worrying thing is that gardeners chuck it on as well. I think every gardener believes if they don't throw on artificial fertilisers, nothing will grow. But I've never put them on
I've never
my
put
garden.
anything on this garden.
Because the nitrogen cycle gives you the nitrogen, you've got the phosphate and the potash in the soil, and so as a gardener we don't have to use it, and it's all just tipping out into the water, the phosphate levels. it's just a waste of money. It's just generating income.
Well, it's worse than
isn't
that,
it?
because it creates a huge extra cost then in getting rid of it from the system. There's much great public concern about the state of our rivers,
Yeah.
and not really people putting two and two together and saying, well, where is it coming from? You know, there are hot spots like the River Wye, where there's a direct connection being made to the chicken farming and the use of all the phosphates from the chicken farming leaching into the river, and the river being killed. You know, the salmon have gone and so on. But for the most part, people just are very unaware of the connectedness in the landscape. And in a way, the garden is the one place you can really begin to rebuild that awareness of the way that things are connected.
Yeah.
And there are no-go areas in the conversation, like the cat population in this neighbourhood is just plague proportions. And I'm astonished every year when the song thrushes still sing and the robins still manage to find somewhere to nest, because the unnatural predator population here is huge. But I just know you're going to alienate half the population if you start to talk about that too much. But actually, I think just being aware of the changing seasons, of the interconnectedness, just that kind of link between the pond, the newts and the stone walls for winter, those kinds of very modest understandings of the way that the world is connected together, I think help to inform the way you then see these much bigger issues.
Yeah, yeah. Great, well, it's been fascinating, Chris. Thank you very much indeed for showing me your garden. I love it. So nice to see it in the flesh.
And in the sun. I mean, how lucky were we?
Yeah, it's lovely with spring bursting into life. Thank you.